Hello and welcome to the Kim Iverson Show. Thank you guys so much for being here today. So today we're going to be talking to somebody who is very knowledgeable. This person does extensive deep dive content, like very, very extensive, very, very deep dive. And he does it on a regular basis. I don't even know how he has the bandwidth to do it, honestly. But he's joining us today, and we're going to be talking about some really interesting subjects like nanotech and the technocracy and COVID. He's been covering COVID and the vaccines pretty extensively. We might venture into some other topics as well. He's been covering foreign policy, the war in Gaza. We're talking to Ryan Christian. He is the founder and editor-in-chief of The Last American Vagabond, co-founder of Pirate Stream Media, and the host of the Daily Wrap-Up. Ryan is, if you've watched him before, he is very nonpartisan. You would know this. He's known for this, for being nonpartisan, objective to a fault, kind of pisses everybody off at some point. But that's how you know the guy is really, truly doing a deep dive and getting to the heart of the information. And what I really love about Ryan is he tells everybody, he puts the links to all of his sources for every single show, extensive links, and tells people to do their own research. Don't just trust him. Don't trust anybody. Do your own research, because that is the way that you're really going to know the truth. So I'm excited to have a conversation with Ryan today. We're going to get into a lot of subjects that we don't get into a whole lot here, and hopefully he can break them down for us in a way that we can understand. Again, he does really deep dives. And so the information he has is extensive, and he's very knowledgeable, works with Whitney Webb. They're very, very similar in a lot of ways, so you kind of understand what you're getting here. Ryan Christian, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Okay, so I want to get into, first of all, there's so many subjects that we get into, so much stuff that you cover. Actually, can I just ask you how in the world you have the stamina to do it? How long are your shows?
Yeah, it's a trust me, it's a battle that I myself am trying to. I understand, especially today, that the shorter content reaches a lot more people. But my battle here is that we're covering things that are so nuanced and there's so much information behind them, and I want people to be able to learn this stuff and be able to and even disagree with me on it, not just repeat what we're saying. And so my shows can vary between an hour or something is usually kind of like the lowest these days, to
Yeah.
4 hours. I've had shows well over that too.
Four.
and,
I
and
was seeing 3-4 hours are
yeah,
your shows
and it's
every day.
multifaceted. It's a multiple topics, so it's not just like a one focus. It's rarely that long for one topic, but
Right.
I think it's important to take our time and dive into these things and talk about it.
I just don't know. I mean, look, like we're doing a similar job here. I just don't know
Yeah.
how. So knowing how this job is done, I don't know how you can gather that much information every day, 4 hours worth or 3 hours worth, and especially at the level you do it at, because you're deep diving into a lot of these subjects. It's not just like like, oh, I mean,
Mhm.
somebody could do a 4 hour show. I mean, we see people on Twitter Spaces doing that all the time, right? They'll do these really
Mhm.
long Twitter Spaces, but they've got other people talking. They're talking about random stuff. It's usually very surface. They don't have to do, but deep diving is very exhausting.
It is, and I wanna give a huge shout out to my community in general. I'm sure you have the same kind of dynamic where, people will send stuff to me all the time, and
Yeah.
as I'm sure, again, you probably I can't even look at all the stuff I get sent. It's like I'm combing through what I'm gonna not look at that day, and I just wanna give a shout out to all the people that are constantly sending things they think are interesting, and so basically, it's a never-ending process. I mean, and I should point out, I don't really have a personal life because this is all I do. It's like every day, all day. But essentially it's like a development throughout the day, and the stories build, and I've got different categories, and so it's not all of it's like a one day process.
Yeah.
Like I've got whole windows full of tabs and saved, on Smart Dust or on COVID-19 or whatever, and I'll pull in different topics and kind of organize it. But sometimes I just get like a topic, something happened that day, and I just take the time to dive through it. And I think the most important thing is that I think we were briefly saying beforehand, like I'm not afraid to say I don't know. And I
Yeah.
like going through the information and kind of framing things and posing questions and saying, you decide for yourself. And, a lot of people always feel like they have to make a choice and pick a side. And I think that we get lost in that sometimes. And that kind of extends the show too.
So at the Last American Vagabond, you've got Whitney Webb she's there with you. Who else is on your team?
Yeah, right. Whitney Webb also, and I pride myself on this for our whole, group, that ultimately I like and support them having their own projects and building their own platforms. So Whitney runs Element and Hangout, and that's an
Right.
amazing platform of her own. And so she writes for TLAV. Derek Bros writes for TLAV. Robert Inlakesh writes for TLAV. Taylor Hudak writes and does interviews for TLAV. And then there's a few, we just recently started working with a few multiple different people that we brought on. I think what some of the people that I kind of Matt Arrett is another writer for TLAV. I'm just trying to think of the people on the peripheral that jump in and do different things and do great like
Yeah.
clips and stuff. But that's the bulk of the team right there.
Yeah. I mean, it's really an impressive entity that you've built, this impressive media empire, I should say.
Thank you.
But you get censored all the time. I mean, you are like one of the most censored people.
An
How
understatement.
are you on? You're on Twitter now, so they've let you back on.
Yeah, and
Um,
I will give credit where credit is due for that, but we can get into that. I've got comments on why I think that's kind of the way it is today, but I've literally been censored on every single platform I think I've ever been involved with.
I
Doesn't
think
mean that
you're
I've
literally the most censored content creator that I personally know. I know that there's others out there that think they're more censored, like Jackson Hinkle or something, but you are way more censored. I mean, you've been, and it's probably because you do all these deep dives and you're exposing so much, and it's real, real information that's out there. But how many rounds on Twitter have you finally? So you're back on Twitter, but this is like your fifth time or something.
Yeah, I think 5 or 6 actually, because
Yeah.
what I started doing, and just a shout out to, I think Corbett's been doing it as well. We have did a podcast on this. Pirate streams is what I've called it. And so, but it started with YouTube, but I've been doing it with all of them. So on Twitter, I reached out to people and said, hey, if you want to essentially let me log in through your account and use it,
Ah,
it'll still be yours, but it's like a pirate stream, pirate radio kind of concept. And so I had like 3 other accounts, doing this because I was unjustly censored to begin with. And so eventually they brought it back, but I believe that's 6 times, or yeah, I think 6 total, including my original account. And we're talking like complete censorship, like it's
yeah.
been deleted, it's gone, suspended permanently kind of a thing.
And
And
you have
that
to rebuild.
yeah, and that's the craziest part that people don't think about is it's the first time that happened. Like I didn't really want to admit it at the time, but it was pretty disjointing. Like I was just kind of like, how do I that's like you put your eggs in that basket. And I'm right
Yeah.
now I'm starting to see it develop the same way. So it's like trying to build other platforms, but you lose a lot of connection when that happens and it's hard.
And you're not on YouTube.
I am, but I'm not. I've never restarted. So I had a backup that was censored. I had my main channel was censored, over 100,000 subscribers. And since then,
What
I've
do you
never
mean censored? Did
restarted.
they just
Deleted,
demonetize or they
deleted,
wiped it out? They wiped
wiped
out
it
the
out,
channel.
deleted. So that's a good point. We should be clear because there's
Yeah,
multifaceted. But,
right.
but since then, I didn't want to start another one because I knew it would end up the same way. So that's where the idea was born for the pirate streams concept because it's pretty taboo to be like, hey, send me your password. Let me log in through your account.
Not
And,
only that, but I mean, to be honest, Ryan, I would never let you do that on my account, not because I wouldn't trust you, but because you're going to get my account banned.
Exactly. And I was very transparent about that, and so people just wanna support me in doing that. No joke, I lost count. I've had over, I would say probably low estimate, over 50 other channels, legitimately, that have been removed since then. I
Yeah.
mean, people that are following us, it's a new pirate channel almost every 3 or 4 days, and they just keep censoring them.
So you've been banned completely. Your channel wiped off of YouTube.
Mhm.
You've been wiped off of Twitter several times. What about the other platforms?
Yeah, you name it. Facebook, multiple times. I'm on like my 4th account, pirate account for Facebook. But crazy things like LinkedIn, they just I had paid for an entire year membership and they deleted the whole thing, or random things like Venmo, where they just deleted my account when I never used it for anything other than paying my exterminator. Just because it was connected to something else, or the larger ones like PayPal. They stole thousands of dollars from me, never got it back. Patreon deleted the whole thing, stole money, never got it back. Whitney is in the same regard with Patreon for things that are now correct. I think it was either blood clots or myocarditis, and they censored the whole thing.
Right. So Patreon kicked you off of Patreon?
Censored, blocked the whole thing. They will. It's one of these permanently suspended games where it's
Uh-huh.
there, but I'm not going to delete what they want me to delete, so it just kind of stays there forever.
And PayPal did this to you as well. They
Yeah,
cut you off.
that was not even a choice to do anything about it. They just booted me out, held the money under some process, and I never got it back.
How long ago was that?
Oh, years. I have to
How
look
can they
back.
hold on to that money? How can they steal the money like that?
I could tell you, I had a lot of talks about this at the time. That's a crime. There's no way around it. So what they
Right.
argue is they because the implication is that I'm doing something illegal or wrong or whatever. So they go, we're going to hold it in case we need to use that money to pay for things you did wrong, or pay people that might have you've stolen from, or whatever. So we're holding it just in case. And after a 6-month process of investigation, they tell you that they'll get back to you. And I've talked to at least 3 other people that went through the same process and never got that follow up. They just kept the money, and I've reached back out, no response.
How are they able to do that? That just seems so, especially, I mean, have you been charged with a crime?
No, no. I mean, that's the thing. I wasn't, in fact, even violating their rules. Like that's the point. It goes back to the same game about. It was. I think it's either associating with promoting terrorist organizations or simply by like talking about foreign policy dynamics or something like that. And it's not. These at the time we talked about this, I did an incredibly deep dive on what they were claiming. There's no violation even of their own terms of service.
I mean, how can they just take the money? I mean, that
I
they're
know.
not even it's not like they're paying you. It's not like YouTube, right? Where they're running ads on your show. They've got an ad sales team. They're handling all of that. They're giving you a cut of the money. So it's like a business partnership. That's one thing where then they said, okay, we're going to end the business partnership and we don't want you to make any money from us anymore, right? That's one
Mhm.
thing. But PayPal is just an intermediary. I mean, they're just taking money from one, holding it so that then they could
Yep.
distribute it to another. How can they get away with stealing that money that was never theirs? It's not like
Yeah.
they were giving you a cut from something that a business deal you were doing together.
Yeah, and on top of that, the point that I made at the time was, look, these people sent this in good faith to me, right? This
Right.
was not to you. So at the very least, you should be refunding them, right? But that's not
Right.
what happened because I reached out to multiple people and no, they never got anything back. And because there were like people that had like recurring donations, some of them for, $100 a month or stuff like that.
Right.
And it not only was that money. So here's the thing too. They took the money that was just sitting in the account. But don't forget the real point was that we had, I think at the time it was like $3,000-4,000 recurring coming through there. Now talk about that's a huge hit. Anybody in this business knows that's
Right.
huge. Like that was like we need to reevaluate how we're going to run this business.
Right.
It's crazy.
So how are you running it now? I mean, how do you collect money if you can't do it through Venmo or PayPal or
Yep.
Patreon?
Yeah.
I mean, what are you doing now?
It's a precarious situation, and it's one that a lot of people are coming to terms with, and even beyond that, like people like Mercola had his entire bank account removed and all that kind of stuff. So what I'm doing is just trying to find platforms that I think are more amenable to free speech.
Yeah.
Like for instance, right now I'm still unfortunately using Stripe, and I feel like that's the next shoe that's going to drop. But it's
Right.
you just have to kind of choose your demons in all this right now. But I advocate people to send in direct mailing to our mailbox. That's the easy way, but that could also be manipulated. Or cryptocurrency donations. I've got a bunch of different things. Buy me a coffee, Subscribe Star. Actually, Subscribe
Yeah.
Star is one of the few that I have never seen any, at least for me or anybody I know of, any kind of censorship. So they've been pretty
Subscribe
solid.
Star? I've never heard of this one.
Patreon alternative, essentially.
Okay. Oh, interesting. Interesting. Um, Man, that is just really frightening. And the
Yeah.
thought that, like Mercola, that you could be debanked, and not only was Mercola debanked, but people just working there, wasn't it like a whole
Yeah.
slew of people who
Yeah,
were
crazy
debanked?
enough. Yeah, it was I believe it was his COO and then, like, their family members. And I
Right,
shouldn't
yeah,
even
it was
say
like,
like, that's explicitly what happened. It was the son. I said like only in regard to the COO, I forget if that's the right title, but the
yeah,
family members of people he worked with, they had their banks frozen. Like, think about that. Like, we're talking the families and the children, who have lives and tuition and, it's like, that's just unparalleled. I just can't and so this is where I see this going for sure. I just wonder when that's gonna start happening or the trucker convoy, right, in Canada,
right.
they did the same thing.
Well, the fact that we're even hearing the fact that I know a person, you, that this has happened to, where PayPal's cutting you off, Venmo's cutting you off, stealing your money. The fact that this is, one removed, right? One person removed. That is because previously we would just maybe hear stories of, oh, this happened to so and so. But now this is happening so frequently. I mean, we're hearing about it more often. The trucker convoy, as you mentioned, Mercola, yourself, the list goes on of the people that this is actually happening to. And so this is no longer just like, oh, that fringe terrorist that
Right.
was in their basement with their terrorist cell, and that's what they were stopping, because that was really kind of the premise of debanking somebody, or of
Mhm.
halting payments to that person, right? So that they couldn't commit acts of terror, they couldn't commit crimes. But these are thought crimes. I mean, Mercola, what kind of crime is he committing? What kind of crime are you committing? The trucker convoy, the protests, these are thought crimes, and
And
they're
we're not
going
even being
after
charged
people.
with a crime though. Like,
Right, and
it's
they're
not
not
even
even
a thought
right,
crime.
right, there's no right. Well, because they haven't been able to figure out a way to
Right.
criminalize thought as
Not yet.
much. Not yet, right? That is just so dystopian that this is, and this is where we're headed.
Mhm.
Well, let's just start with this one then, this conversation. I do want to get into a bunch of stuff like the smart dust and the nanotech and whatnot, but let's talk about the right now, the where we're headed with this kind of digital world, the
Mm.
Great Reset? Where do you think this falls in? Would you say this is part of a Great Reset? Would you say this is part of technocratic control? Would you say, the fact that they're trying to digitize everything? I went to the bank yesterday, for example, and when I was there at the bank, I received new cards for my bank account,
Mm.
and I noticed that the cards looked pretty different. And the banker said, "Oh, yeah, it's because we're trying to get everybody to go digital. We're trying to get rid of the physical cards. We're trying to just go," and which, I mean, the card is already tech as it is, right? It's not physical
Mhm.
cash. It's not gold in my pocket. I'm relying on this card that's connected to a bank account, which is a digitized numbers, right?
Right.
Hoping that the numbers still exist and that I can use those numbers. But they're wanting us to go digital. There's talks of, digital driver's license, right? Just digitizing our whole lives.
Mhm.
Where is this part of Great Reset, would you say?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think the Great Reset is a part of the larger technocratic agenda. That is like the initiative that is meant to drive us into this technocratic age. And this is what the craziest thing about these conversations. These aren't even debatable. Remember, during the beginning of this, the term Great Reset was just deemed, excuse me, a conspiracy theory. Yeah, legitimately, like while a book
Right,
was written about
right,
it, like it's just so
right,
ridiculous. And so the same thing, like technocracy is not a conspiracy theory. There are people
right.
that legitimately believe there should be a scientific technocratic elite that ultimately make decisions. This goes back to like the 70s where this was really proposed as like, well, we should shift into a new style, which in an interesting way make you could argue it might have even started from like a legitimate point to say our politicians are crazy and ridiculous and they don't care about us. So maybe we should lean into the experts and let them decide, which I don't think any of that makes sense at the end of the day. But today we're watching people, I argue, trying to kind of capitalize on that idea and create a new dynamic because I think they're aware of the kind of diminishing power structure in the way it currently stands. That'd be my opinion. But I think the Great Reset is absolutely about executing a transition into, the reimagining our lives for the benefit of the control structure. And
Yeah.
that's what, and technocracy is tapped into all the stuff you're talking about. The digital IDs, it allows a situation to be built. Imagine the term that we talk about is like the technocratic panopticon. You're building a situation where you may not necessarily be aware that there's anybody looking at you, but you're under the impression that you're always being watched, that everything is tracked, which is essentially what's happening. And we
Yeah.
talked about the vaccine passports and all of that, social credit. These are all tenets of the Great Reset and what technocracy is trying to accomplish, I would argue.
It's very scary, when I think about how dependent my own life is on tech,
Hmm.
and I think about, well, okay, if the power goes out and I mean, I don't even have a landline. I was talking to somebody the other day who has landlines anymore, and then the person brought up a good point. They said, "Well, what if there's an emergency and all the cell towers go out? Like, maybe you should have a landline." And I thought,
Yeah.
"Oh, I hadn't even we're so dependent now. We don't even think of I don't even think I have a telephone jack in my house, honestly, in order to plug in a landline. I wouldn't even know where to find it. I think they've all been covered up. Um, but we are so dependent on tech that they really, once they get us to that point, then they really can control our behavior. That's really like we saw that with the trucker convoy.
Hmm.
Speak out, lose your livelihood. Speak
Right.
out, your bank account gets frozen. You're not able to spend money. They could turn off. At that point, they could get your cell phone, right? The cell phone company to shut down your communications. They've already tried to shut us down on social media. I mean, this is extremely frightening that I try to think back to when there were kingdoms and fiefdoms, right? And people
Right.
were under the control of the monarchies. How did the monarchy gain control over how did they get the people to comply with the wishes of, especially like really dystopian stuff? Like there was some
Mm.
stuff that, the king would rape the women, that or whatever, right? Like all these really atrocious stories. And you wonder why did people put up with this?
Mhm.
Why did they allow this to happen?
Yeah, go
They
ahead.
had a control over them, right? I mean, they
Right.
had some level of control. And maybe that type of control doesn't work today, but they're figuring out another level of control. But it's the same idea, right? It's the same like keeping the little people, the
Yeah.
peasants
It
controlled.
it's a perceived power dynamic, right? And that's really and, it's all really an illusion at the end of the day, other than, like, actual kinetic force and weapons and stuff like that, but the point
Right.
being that we perceive them to be in control, to be powerful, to be, all-seeing, and so and a lot of people fall into that and don't even question these dynamics. I think a lot more people are beginning to. But to your point about, like, the tech, I think what you said there is exactly right in my opinion. This is about like I said before, sort of a dying power structure that's recognizing people are seeing through it and are trying to reimagine how that control can, we're being driven into a situation where I argue they'll never need to reimagine it again, right? Like where we're going to step pushed into something where they don't care if we see we're controlled. Too late, we're already in there. That's the way it feels to me. And you're right about the tech. I mean, especially being in this field, it's one of the things I'm battling with every day. I'm like, I need a new phone. The old phone is getting it's all planned obsolescence and all that. And I'm thinking, man, I shouldn't just go buy another Apple phone. But it's so hard to pull yourself away from
Right.
the things that you're tapped into for the work and so on. And it's so, but I know I should, and it's very difficult, especially for the average person that doesn't truly understand or doesn't want to understand how invasive these things truly are.
Yeah.
Like you said, it's not just about like, oh, this is for your convenience. All of these businesses are being driven in to things that are in many cases actually counterintuitive, actually more like businesses that are promoting woke ideology, which completely hurts their bottom line, but they do it anyway. Like there's a reason that's happening. I think it's because they're being incentivized to drive this in for larger reasons. Again, for example, this is a kind of an abstract one, but my brother works for a car dealership, and the dealership, even though these are some of he's like one of the most profitable salesmen in the entire company, and they're trying to drive them to take action that will minimize the amount of money they make, ultimately because it like digitizes and expedites the system. And I'm thinking to myself, how does that possibly make sense? You're literally asking for them to make less money for you. And I'm thinking the only way that that makes sense is if they're getting some kind of benefit from outside to justify that, like a counterbalance to say, well, don't worry, if you do the right ESG thing, you'll get some kind of kickback for it.
Yeah.
And it's everywhere I look today. I don't understand it unless there's something driving that.
It's really frightening when we think about our bank accounts in particular. Like, it's one thing to wipe us off of social media. It's another thing to debank a person
Yeah.
to, that's a whole different level because how do you then support yourself? I think the only solace I have in this is that we are becoming more aware of it because
Yes.
because they're more blatant about it, right? There's been people who've been dealing with this for over a decade, but we just didn't really know about them or hear about them. It was such a fringe, not it just wasn't very common, and now it's so much more common. But the one thing that I think is, well, there are just so many smart people now. They haven't been able to fully crush education.
Mm.
Although I do feel like there is an attack on education, I
Oh, yeah.
think that's like multifaceted. Yes, do we have a problem with our education system? Certainly. Like, is there too much wokeism? And yeah, I 100% agree with that. But I also think that there is this undercurrent attack on education where people are being told you don't need it. Well,
Mm.
that's the way you telling people they don't need education that's how you control people. You keep them stupid. If you could keep
That's
people
interesting.
dumb, yeah, then it's a form of control. So, but we do have educated people still, and they will build alternatives. People will revolt
Mm.
ultimately, and they'll figure out ways to build new systems and to convert and then as they shut that down, then we move on to the next one, like a swarm. We're just
Yeah.
like, where do we go next? Where do we go next? Where do we go next? And I think that as that swarm continues to move and move and move, as they're more blatant about it, more the swarm gets larger. And so that's the one thing that kind of brings me some thinking of like, yeah, they think they can pull this off, but the masses are just bigger. There's more of us than there are of them. And so
Yeah.
maybe we could pull it off by just being a swarm.
Yeah, no,
Maybe.
no, I agree that I think people are truly seeing through it. I mean, and we have examples of that what you're talking about. Like for example, James Lyons Weiler and IPAC. Like a new peer review process that doesn't need the system to be involved in it.
Mhm.
Or Richard Grove and Autonomy making like their own kind of schooling system. And like that is I think the new people are looking for something outside of the control structure. But to your point about education, that's such an interesting thing. It's the two-party illusion, right? It's the dynamic of creating the false dichotomy, and then the truth is in the middle somewhere, and people are on the two sides of it. Like so, either
Yeah.
all education is bad, or it's so interesting. I see the same thing with like the term sustainability, where they're pretending they're fighting for sustainable things, so it creates this pushback on actual sustainability, even though that's
Right.
not even what they're fighting for. And so I think this is all of what we're dealing with. This like kind of binary two-party illusion kind of mindset, at least in this country more than anywhere else. But I think it's important to seek out these alternative platforms, like you said. And yeah, if they destroy them, build another one. That's the only way we can fight it.
Right. Right. And they've proven that they're good at destroying. I mean, look what happened to
Yeah.
Parler. I mean, that was like
Right.
unreal what they did to that platform. That was growing fast, and then they just shut it down. I mean, it was just
Yeah.
insane. So, um, All right, we're going to take just a little break here for a sponsor. We are talking to Ryan Christian. He is the founder and editor in chief of The Last American Vagabond, the co founder of Pirate Stream Media, and the host of the Daily Wrap Up. We'll be right back. We're going to talk about smart dust and nanotech when we come back. Stress may be why you can't lose weight. If you have moderate to high stress, a doctor formulated weight loss supplement called Lean could be your solution. Chronic stress wreaks havoc on blood sugar, which can cause your body to store excess fat. Stress can also slow your metabolism, which fuels weight gain. And you know all about stress eating and sugar cravings. Now, the good news, the studied ingredients in lean have been shown to help maintain healthy blood sugar levels, help optimize metabolism, and keep your appetite under control. If your life is a bit stressful and you want to lose weight, add lean to your healthy diet and exercise lifestyle. Get 15% off and free shipping at takelean.com and enter Kim15. That's promo code Kim15 at takelean.com. Statements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. This product is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease and is not a suitable or alternative for care from a healthcare provider. Okay, Ryan, something you've been covering I don't know anything about. Really interested to hear about smart dust and this nanotech. What is smart dust?
This is such a fascinating topic that I'm actually kind of blown away the more I look into it, how little this conversation has been had since this has been something that I've already known is a real thing, but that I've in deep research proven goes back more than a decade, right? Like, or I think more than, I mean, a decade is probably the safest bet ultimately in regard to when it was utilized and actually done, but like in its inception, going back decades. And this is a DARPA project, right? This is a real, and this is what's so interesting about a lot of these topics is this is not a hypothetical conversation. There's peer reviewed studies. These are military documentation showing you what they're building and what they're working on. So for those that might reflexively want to dismiss something like this is a provable topic. How it
Yeah.
might be used and applied, that's debatable, right? But we're talking about nanotechnology that is the size of like a microscopic particle, right? And so this is not, go ahead.
So,
You have a question?
well, I'm trying to envision this. Like, somebody makes this, like it's in like a microchip kind of a thing.
Yeah, and I even have a video we can pull up if you want to see like a symposium where they make this point. But so it's basically the DARPA chip, or even an alternative that's comparable called the Mu chip. This goes back to early 2000, even before, is a chip that is the size. I think the example he uses is a grain of salt, and it's a tenth of the size of a grain of salt, and there's much smaller than that. And the
Wow.
point is that he said, it's deployable like dust. You can scatter it in the air, and the point is it float with air currents. It can land on your skin, and the point is it relays information. It's two-way communication. It uses your body's own motion and energy and heat to be able to power itself. I mean, this stuff sounds crazy, but it's documented. They've made this. It's executable. It's real. My point is, if you go back that far, I found a company called Dust Networks, and it's a company connected to the U.S. government that openly at the time, decades ago, discussing utilizing this stuff to track cargo. And I'm thinking, okay, wait a minute, how could that possibly be happening unless this is out? And it even shows the guy when he's discussing it with like a faux image of him throwing dust in the air, like to give an example. And I'm thinking, okay, so this has been utilized in a real world setting according to these contractors for the US government. So my real concern is how this is affecting today and how and why it's nowhere in the conversation, while nanotechnology has become this next, the biggest new thing. It's been happening for a long time. And I would add that somebody like Charles Lieber, who is interestingly connected with the conversation of COVID-19. You familiar with Charles Lieber, the guy who was arrested in the beginning, like 2020, from Harvard? At the
Okay.
time, he was the leading expert in the world and still is on nanotechnology. He was
Uh-huh.
arrested with Chinese nationals who were basically secretly moving biomaterial from Beth Israel Hospital to China. Now, he was arrested and he was charged not with that, weirdly enough, but with withholding the fact that he was getting payments from China for scientific work. Never got charged. They slapped him on the wrist. Weirdly enough, while he was being accused of treason, he has never stopped working with China on this work. That's a COVID overlap that I think is very concerning. My point is, in 2011, he published a document and through Harvard talking about his virus-sized transistor. So this is a real thing. This is Harvard work, and he's the leading nanotech in the world. And this is a transistor the size of a virus. And he talks about this, and he says that when you make things this small, technology acts like biology, like it inflates, and you don't know the difference. So I just want us to realize that in 2011, if they have a transistor that can do all of this, and he talks about two-way communication, biosurveillance, that is the size of a virus.
Right.
Like, I can't, like, when they hold up these chips and go, "Here's the new thing," I'm like, "Well, that's obviously not true." Like, if we're at that level in 2011, there's something much darker going on here. Now, I can go in a lot of different directions, but I just wanna make sure people realize this is a very real thing that is, just look up DARPA, smart chips, smart dust. It's very real.
And these are tiny. Have they been is there so you think they've been manufacturing these already and testing them, or do you think they're manufacturing them and deploying them?
Well, I know that they've manufactured them. I know that they've tested them, and I know that they've deployed them. The question is to what degree that's happening. And
Yeah.
and hypothetically, let's just take the provable example from the contractor discussing this. There's a lot more than that, but let's just pretend that's the only example. Decades ago, you could argue that they did a test in a controlled environment somehow outside, and they never did it since. That could be possible, but I think the reality is that this is something that historically, as I know, when we get presented with some new tech, it's usually when you end up looking back that the military had already been using it for a decade or something like
Right,
that.
right,
Very
right,
common. And so I
right.
just don't see how this kind of tech that they were talking about was going to revolutionize the world. Their key point 2 decades ago was this was the linchpin to create smart cities and smart grids. Right. So it obviously is a huge part of like the meshing dynamic we're talking about to be able to create this. So why don't we talk about that today? And this overlaps, and I should make an important point for people that we shouldn't conflate. There is nanoparticles, which are simply just particles that are under a certain size, which deems them to be nano sized.
Okay.
But nanotech overlaps with that, right? So you can have nanoparticles that could be part that even biological side of this that are considered nanotech, but they're not necessarily just because you like, for instance, lipid nanoparticles.
Yeah.
I'm very concerned about that, especially as we continue to see that there are, you know, random proteins and DNA contamination and all these different things, or even information about the lipid nanoparticles that we're not being told. My point would be, though, it could just very well be nano-sized lipids, right? That's possible. So we shouldn't necessarily assume. But my worry is that we've talked about this whole biosurveillance aspect with people like Charles Lieber being a leader in this discussion, or Robert Langer, who just so happens to also be the co-founder of Moderna, who was the lead person on biosurveillance. And I'm talking like internal, like him and Charles Lieber were these two that were working on specifically nanotech internal to be able to relay information, even to the point of being able to influence and control motion and thoughts. And I know it sounds crazy, but this is real. The Guardian wrote about this in 2016, called the magnetoprotein. It's ferritin, is what we're talking about. This is all
Mm.
real stuff. And my worry, and I'm not saying I can prove it, is that this is something that it might have been done. Something that might have been done under the concept of something like moral bioenhancement. I don't know if you've seen the discussion with that in studies where they literally discuss, if we're going to do this, which would be a bioenhancement, it would be smart to do it covertly because people ultimately wouldn't understand. And that's more moral because it's for the right of society. Multiple studies have made that argument from like NIH level. So I just worried that something might have been done in a way for the greater good of society or for biosurveillance. And I just want people to worry about that, or think about that could be utilized and why it's not being discussed.
Especially since we haven't been able to win any of the lawsuits against the COVID vaccines that actually protect our bodily freedom,
Hmm.
right? All the lawsuits, and this has been one of my big concerns is following the various different lawsuits that push back against mandates. Has the some of them they've won, but they're not winning on the I control what goes in my body.
Right.
I control all of that. It's instead on, oh, well, it's arbitrary and capricious. You didn't make everybody do it. So therefore, or it was the wrong government body. They don't have that particular body doesn't have the power to do this. But it doesn't address the question of whether or not they can force us
Hmm.
into in taking certain medicines, or in this case, if they can legally get away with forcing us, for example, to be vaccinated, then legally they could maybe kind of throw dust in the air, or mosquitoes, right? That they were using mosquitoes
Yes.
to try and vaccinate people. They could do this without our consent
Right.
and maybe get away with it and say, well, it's because it is for the greater good. And if they can make that argument like they did with vaccine mandates, and if there's no actual legal parameter that prevents them from doing that, they could actually push the line and get away with this and say, well, we did it for public safety, which is always
Hmm.
the excuse.
And that's an important conversation. And likewise, a conversation that's important that gets regarded as completely ridiculous until you see the peer-reviewed science and the studies and the funding from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, literally on flying vaccinators. Just type that into any search engine. There's countless studies and research turning mosquitoes into vaccinators, which
Yeah.
completely ignores the informed consent concept. Or to your point about the dust, and this overlaps with the interesting conversation of self-spreading vaccines. right? Because if we're talking about a virus-sized transistor, it all kind of blends together in the background. Like, what if that's literally what we're dealing with right now? It's like, how do we
Yeah.
know? Is that self-spreading vaccines have been a conversation for decades now, and it's something that they've talked about right in 2020. I mean, when you really break down the idea of the spike protein, how we've now proven scientifically that it does shed and can in fact cause symptoms, which the Salk Institute themselves proved. What is that if not a self-spreading concept? That
Right.
it then spreads and the symptoms and spreads again. But overlapping with the nanotech aspect of it, and even more, it's so hard to kind of encapsulate this in a way that doesn't sound ridiculous for people from the science, but the idea that we're overlapping with a biological aspect of this, and this is where it gets into like the bioconvergence element of the science, and this is why I'm so harping on all this, is because if you dive into this deeper, people have still not even acknowledged that this stuff exists at the older level, and so if we're talking about the overlapping of like biological elements at this microscopic level to where it kind of like blurs the line, it's just like maybe we're talking about that with the spike protein. Maybe that's what we're dealing with. And I'm just being just hypothetical. And my point about all of this is not that I'm saying we know that this is happening, but I just think it's really alarming. This stuff is so rapidly developing. Like right now, they're rapidly developing mRNA platforms in 20 different ways that I can tell, using the ferritin nanoparticles I discussed. There's a universal ferritin nanoparticle flu vaccine coming out. There's a pan coronavirus ferritin nanoparticle vaccine coming out through WRIAR, the military installation. These are all very real and happening right now. I think we've already proven that the mRNA platform is a failure. Even Fauci
Right.
wrote an article saying that it didn't work, and it's all rapidly going forward. And we're not even acknowledging step one. Like
Right.
it's kind of
Isn't that
scary.
insane?
Yeah,
I watch these videos of Bill Gates saying, "Oh, we're going to have mRNA for everything, for every single virus that's out there, for AIDS, for like," I mean, he's like going on and on naming all these various different viruses, saying, "We're going to have mRNA for that." And I'm thinking, why would we do that when it didn't work the first time? I
yeah.
mean, are people that brainwashed that they will just go along with that even and I think they are, unfortunately. I think that people
Oh,
are that gullible where you look them in the eye and you say, "Look, you took 6 of those and it didn't stop this. You still got COVID 3 times." Like why would you then trust this technology to be the thing for every other virus out there?
yeah.
I mean, it just makes no sense, but people will go with that.
What makes it should make us question, like, there's a lot of different things you could ask, people with depopulation or whatever else, and certainly consider all of these things. But one of them should genuinely be if this is just a means to an end for a larger experiment. Like, are they trying to achieve something through all of this that we don't understand? Because I mean, that's the thing that's so confusing. We
Right.
all see how crazy, clumsy, ham fisted this has been, and they're still pushing it. I mean, and
Right.
this is the important part too, is that I think even newer documents came out showing that at this point, like less than 5% of children have gotten these. I think it's only like under 15% of the entire population. Like the point is that even the people that took it 6 times, they now say no. So
Yeah. Right.
everybody's aware there's a problem, and yet it still goes forward.
Yeah.
So what else is happening there?
Do you think so? What you're talking about with this kind of this smart dust, these nanoparticle, these nanotech, is this where the idea of the of microchips in the mRNA came from? Is that
Yeah, well, here's what I actually think that story I think that was an effort to get ahead of either the fact that there is actually something in there. I think that's how this tends to work, or just about trying to make it sound cartoonishly ridiculous that that's even something that could be possible. When, talking about a microchip, I don't even think the word microchip is even applicable to what we're talking about. Like, we're talking
Mhm.
about robots and these words don't apply when we get to this level. It technically works, but my point would be that if you're talking about a microchip inside of the vaccine, it's a very clunky way of discussing something that I argue they've already theorized. Having tracking systems, and I've talked about this to also getting into the quantum dots. That's nanotechnology. Quantum dots was the remember the quantum dot tattoo technology they came out with, where they were going to put the little spiky patch on you, and it was a vaccine. Well,
Oh,
basically, it was another vaccine concept during COVID, and it was using this nanotechnology. And the point was, which it wasn't really publicly discussed, is that it also kept tracking data on your skin using nanotechnology that you couldn't see, but you could see with like fluorescent. It's pretty crazy stuff. And so my point was, this stuff is already we're well past this idea of this big clunky microchip concept, but that
yeah.
using that made people laugh. So if you so here's a study talking about that, they're tracking with the X, Y, and Z. Like, oh, you saw it's a microchip thing, you're crazy. That's how that's supposed to work, in my opinion. But
Yeah.
well, there's also the overlap of like the genuine tracking concept. There was a vaccine that came out that had like an RFID chip attached to the outside, and that got conflated with being in it and so on. But the real point is ultimately about biosurveillance.
Yeah.
I don't even think it's about tracking whether you've been vaccinated. I think that's just as simple as other terms of forms of surveillance. I think it's more about internal data,
Like
biosurveillance,
what?
biometrics. Well, like understanding, like, and it gets into the stuff that gets beyond what we're dealing with today, like genomics, like DNA, that kind of stuff, but also just being able to actually surveil, you know, what your heart rate is doing that day. Are you getting sick that day, or is there another virus circulating? And I don't think that's really what they care about. But these are the justifications, the arguments being used to keep you safe from the new virus, or make sure you're healthy, make sure you're not going to get diabetes, and it comes
Yeah.
down to just all encompassing control through every aspect, including your health.
Well, obviously, the easy way to do that. I don't even think that it would be easy to kind of go to the population and say, we just want to make sure you don't have heart disease and diabetes. I don't think people will buy that, but I do think people will buy. Again, I just wish people would wake up. Like, come on, guys, we just went through COVID. Like, come on.
Right.
But I do think a lot of people will buy the idea of we'll track whether or not you have the virus. It's a quick and
Mhm.
easy way for us to find out if you have this new disease X, right? So we've got disease X now, and it's 10 times worse than COVID. Is that what they were saying at the World Economic Forum? That disease, there's going to be 10 times
The thing that
deadlier
doesn't
than COVID or
exist, they have no
something.
idea about, but they already know is 10 times worse. Like,
Yeah, right, right. Yeah, exactly. So they're saying, so disease X is here, and luckily we do have, new mRNA tech, but this time the vaccine is really awesome because it'll actually notify us if you're sick. So that way,
yeah, that's a
to
good point.
isolate right away, to keep grandma safe, to keep your children safe. The next one, they'll make sure it goes after the kids. They
Mhm.
realize that people were willing to sacrifice grandma and grandpa, for the youth. And so next time, I think what really worries me about COVID and what happened during the pandemic is that, again, the lawsuits did not prevent them from ever mandating vaccines again. It just prevented certain bodies or certain ways of this. So they learned. They now it's like, they're it's like, okay, we now learned that's not the strategy. We've got to use this government body instead,
Mhm.
and that's not the strategy. We have to make sure everybody does it right. So they're learning the loopholes through those lawsuits, which is really frightening. And
Yeah.
they're also learning from COVID what we're willing to tolerate and what we're not, and what truly frightens us. And they found that, okay, if it's grandma and grandpa who are 80 years old, people are going to say, but grandma and grandpa are 80 years old. I mean, we're kind of expected that they were going to pass at, any time now. Like, it could have been anything, not just COVID. Anything could have killed
Mhm.
them. But when they go after kids next time, then they'll learn, okay, now we have to go after the kids. We have to go after the young
Mhm.
adults, because that's what's going to frighten people.
Right.
So I feel like they're learning the soft spots. They're learning the workarounds. And next time they'll say, and this is you want to keep your family safe, you want to keep your children safe, then your neighbors need to have this nanotech need to
Yeah.
be tracked to know. And that's
That's
how
a
they'll get people to do it.
Yeah,
Fear.
that's an excellent point too, and, I'm not even sure if that's the direction it will go, but it's a great way to think about it, that it could be as simple as that, is just presenting it to you, sort of problem, reaction, solution, as,
Yeah.
here's what will happen if you don't do it, and then, and always as it goes is, if you take this, you'll go to the front of the line, right? But then it becomes, if you don't take it, well, you're going to the back of the line. Then it becomes, if you don't
We'll
take
take it.
it,
We're
you're
cutting you
killing
off from your
grandma.
bank account,
Yeah,
like
exactly, exactly. And so it's used as progression to force you in. But I'm
right.
more worried about the dynamic that's essentially like, oh, guess what? It's already everywhere you live and in your body right now. So oops. But now here's how we're going to go forward. Like, that's how do we go back from that? Like, this is my point about talking about how old this is. And I don't want to scare people, but I'm genuinely worried. I mean, again, if we can prove, and I have proven, that it has been utilized, that means at least to some degree it is circulating in some parts of the world, whatever. So what if it's already everywhere, like glyphosate? And let's remember that
Sure.
that is literally everywhere in the world. It's in the clothes, the air you're breathing. It's proven. I mean, there's been studies on this. And so if we suddenly have nanotech everywhere and ubiquitous, I see. I would argue that it wouldn't need to be told to us, but that could be a card that's pulled at some point to say, oh, well, guess what? Hey, it happened during Trump's administration and it's his fault. And here's how we're going to deal
Right.
with it. Something as simple as that. But I just think,
Oops, mRNA contained these nanotech. Remember
right.
that microchip crazy conspiracy theory?
Yeah,
Whoops.
China did it. Yeah, oh, there you go, easy. Everyone believes
Yeah.
it, and it suddenly it's. But I think that the scary part about it is that getting into the biosurveillance aspect of it is that this becomes something that is more about controlling, like you were pointing out, right? Like, so you're gonna get sick tomorrow. Now, the point is not that they would actually do that, even if it is real. The point would be that that's a coercive tool. They could argue, well, we can tell that you're all going to get sick, so quarantine. And then if you get, then you all quarantine, and they go, oh, well, good thing we did it because you would have gotten sick. It's
Right.
like, well, nothing actually happened. So was there even
Right.
really a problem? And if you give them that kind of power, we already know, if we really ask ourselves, that they will abuse it. That's how it's always worked.
I do not want to live in that world.
Neither do I. It's already kind of happening too, right? I mean, that's essentially what they did during COVID. It's, this new or following, a new variant rising up, massive
Yeah.
lockdowns. It's the same kind of thing. It's just a smaller version of it.
Right. Yeah, they did it over and over again. Oh, the new variant. You're
Yeah.
right. It's very Minority Report. I mean, we all watched that movie and we're like, oh, that's a dystopian, terrible future. Nobody wants to really live like that, where they could tell whether or not
Hmm.
you're going to be a murderer. You're not one yet, but we're going to come after you now.
Right.
I mean, that's what they did during COVID, right? They said, well, you're going to be a murderer if you go out there with your COVID virus and you're going to spread it around and kill grandma.
Hmm.
And yeah, I mean, it was just an absolute disaster. But yeah, you're right. Maybe they would do it in a way where it's like, oops, it's already out there. So what can we do about that now? It's kind of like all of these big companies where they contaminate the water or the air, and then they say, oops, sorry,
Right.
we didn't realize that was going to kill you and give you cancer. But
Right.
man, now it has. Sue us.
Right. And
Right.
we also funded a vaccine for cancer, so buy that because it'll work for you.
Right.
Like,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, here's the follow up. Here's the
yeah.
antidote. Oh man, it's really frightening. And what is frightening is that they could so easily coerce people. Again, it just really is disappointing to me that so many people still gobble up the narratives of COVID. I mean, I hear it. I was sitting at the airport. This was like 2 months ago. This wasn't even long. I was sitting at an airport bar waiting for my flight next to this guy. And we got into a conversation about politics, and he looks at me and he says, "You're not one of those anti-vaxxers, are you?" And I'm sitting there thinking, this is we are in 2024. It was like right the early January. I'm like, we're at 2024. We are 4 years out, and people are still saying, "No, you're the crazy
Yeah.
one if you still think that the vaccine stopped the spread or did whatever whatever
Yeah.
you think. Like you're the conspiracy theorist, not me."
Right. I mean, it really is still. I mean, if you really stand back and take in like the breadth of what happened, I mean, I still can't believe it actually happened. Like then it still is happening.
Yeah,
It is alarming, and this is a level of like people talked about the mass psychosis, which then got like a really crazy amount of pushback, and it's a really weird dynamic, but. I think it's obvious that there's some level of psychosis to this.
of
Like
course.
I talked about the idea of like a cult mentality, right? Where
Yeah,
we've seen documentaries where, that person will fight to the death to defend the cult until years later they're going, man, I don't know what I was doing. I didn't even realize what was happening. It's like they're lost in something like that. And it's think about being in a moment of like breathless fear constantly. Still, after 4 years, like constantly going, oh my God, the next variant. Oh, I got to put my mask on today. The numbers are high. It's like that's the cortisol pumping through your body every day. Like you're going to die when you're 45. Like
yeah.
it's bad for you. That's part of the problem, probably.
Yeah, well, it's the sheep mentality, and only one third break free from that, according to
Yeah.
studies, right? It's like one third of the people will actually kind of question and say, "Wait a minute, really?"
Yeah.
Like, but the problem is 2/3 will go along with it, and so if you go with this majority mentality, then that majority mentality will just, I mean, the one third. It doesn't matter. It's like me here in California. One third of the people here are actually conservative, but they never get any power politically,
Mhm.
even though there's quite a few of them. I mean, here in California, people think that the only people you meet are liberals, and it's not true. There's actually plenty of conservatives. You run into them all the time. It's just that they're so small. They're only one third or one fourth that they have zero power politically in the state.
Right.
And that's how the tyranny happens, right? In fact, I was looking on Twitter, and it's kind of off topic, but I was looking on Twitter today and I saw a meme. It was some organization on Twitter, and they are they want to get rid of the electoral college because of
Mm.
the majority vote
Mhm.
issue. But a lot of people are pushing back, saying, no, that's how you end up with tyranny of the majority, right? Is if the minority has no say, if you take away the power of the minority completely, the power of that, one third, then you end up with a tyrannical system. And I think they're
Mhm.
banking on that, quite frankly. I think they're trying to dismantle any sort of power the minority has, any
Yeah.
sort of checks and balances, in order to have, because they know they can control 2/3 of the people.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I would say, I mean, at least maybe in a wishful thinking, but I really do. I think that's changed today. Maybe because of how belligerent Israel was of the way they carried this out. Maybe because of how COVID-19 changed people's perspectives. But I think that's shifted. I'm being hopeful in that regard. But
Yeah, I
I,
don't
I
think it has. Like, what do you mean? So you think more than one third of the? I still think
yeah.
one third of the people. I think on social media we're seeing maybe a higher number of people, like for example, who have opened their eyes about the atrocities of what Israel's doing, and
Mhm.
Zionism, and ethno nationalism of that country. But I think that just if you just go around in the world, it's still one third.
Yeah, you may be right. I mean, and trust me, I see it too, but I see changes like I pointed out with the COVID shot. Like, it's rare that you see that where people, they didn't stop telling them to take it. Like they pushed harder, and you got the people that had already taken 5 of them suddenly quietly do it, saying no. I'm like, okay, that shows you something right there. There's a shift happening. Even to the hardest supporters of that. And same with what's going on with Israel right now. I mean, I've never seen something like this in my life where people,
Right.
like every organization that they otherwise have told us to look to suss out they're all telling it's genocide. Every one of them,
Right.
UN, Oxfam, everybody, human rights groups, and the only people pushing back are the politicians. And it's like, how do you? I mean, it could just be this topic, right? But I have a
Right.
hopeful feeling about that. This is a reason why I say we need to capitalize on this momentum and not just kind of, because there'll be another 55 agendas in the next 20 seconds that try to pull people back in to being lost in the in the two-party illusion, I think,
Right.
but I am overall hopeful. I really am. I see
I
things
don't
shifting.
know. You know why I'm not is because of the Iraq war. I look at the Iraq war and I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, all these people were for it. And now
Yeah.
suddenly they're all saying, oh, okay, well, I'm not for it. I mean, people will shift when they realize they're wrong. It takes them a long time to do it. And then they
Mhm.
eventually do. And then they pat themselves on the back for their new, enlightenment. And I think that's what's happened with COVID. It's in the rearview mirror for a lot of people. So a lot of people who took 5, 6 doses of the vaccine and demonized everybody around them, and now they say, well, okay, I don't want to take another one and it didn't really work. And but come the next thing then they're suddenly going to be all for it. They just have,
Mm.
there's something in their brain. And I do think it's like um how you're wired, just like a left brain, right brain or something. I don't know what it is specifically, but I think and they'll probably use the nanotech to find out like which one of us, you know, they know which part of the brain actually causes 1/3 of us to say, I don't know about that.
Yeah.
And then they're going to attach it to us and be like, that's the one. We found out, we know which 1/3. But I think that it's like then the next thing comes along and then their brain just kind of reverts back into it. And
Yeah.
I do think it has to do with fear base, fear.
I think it's
And
engineered for sure.
yeah, you think so?
Well, I mean, just what you're saying, fear, our schooling system that's like designed to pump out obedient workers. That's what the model's literally
Right.
based on, the Prussian system. It's really about creating obedient followers. And
Yeah.
like you're saying, you can just take that number, a third of people just kind of go, well, I disagree, and I'm going to think for myself. But I think that it's designed to make people think that way. But I think there's so many elements today, whether it's social media or shows like these that are out there that people can see, and other people are sharing it, that is kind of, this, I can, going back to the original point, speaks to why they're trying to reimagine everything. Like, I think they're losing control of narratives and what people think, and
Oh,
and
for
and that
sure.
terrifies them,
Yeah.
and I think that's part of it. So that, I mean, that's all. That's why, I mean, I don't know if it's 51% or 95%, but I do feel like the majority of people today, and not in every topic, but are just kind of like, more than ever, going, well, I don't necessarily buy exactly what you're saying, right? I still tap into the two-party system. I vote Republican, Democrat, but I question a little more than I used to. At least that's what I'm seeing, and that makes me positive. I
Well,
feel
I
positive.
kind of wonder if they're afraid, because they know that it's 1/3 of us that are going to stop and say, I don't know, I got to think about that. Hold
Mhm.
on, let me process that. They know 2/3 are going to be sheep. The issue is that who are the 2/3 sheep going to follow, right?
Yeah,
So are they going
right.
to follow the elites? Are they going to follow the
Great
Klaus
point.
Schwabs of the world and the political class, and or are they going to follow us, the 1/3
Right.
that say, I don't think so, and here's what we now think. That's why Robert F. Kennedy Jr., well, and I don't want to get into all the flaws, right? I get it. Like we could go on about that, but just from the outset, what he represented to people during COVID
Mhm.
was this, a prominent person who was thinking differently, challenging the narrative, and that catapulted him to a level of popularity that now he's able to run for president and have an actual shot at potentially doing some damage there in the election, right?
Right. Right.
And that is because because I believe, even just in my own experience from being a person that questions, like yourself, we're both questioning things all the time and not really going along with any narrative. And then sometimes when I'll take a position, and I'll have a group of people that watch the show that really like, and, oh yeah, Kim, you're right. And then I say something else about a different topic and they're like,
You're a shill.
how dare you? Right. But those people, as much as they might think they're in the 1/3, and maybe I'm not either, maybe I'm fooling
Right.
my own self.
Right. Maybe
But
we're lost too.
right, yeah, but they're in the 2/3. It's just that they chose not to follow the political elite. They chose to follow
Mhm.
somebody else.
That's an
Um,
important point.
Yeah, so I think that's what they're afraid of. They're afraid of us. That's why they keep
Yeah,
censoring. That's
yeah.
why they keep deplatforming. They're debanking people because they're afraid that the one third will rise. You know, that's why they don't like Joe Rogan. That's why they don't like Tucker Carlson. They don't like
Mhm.
Elon Musk. Like all these people that, despite what good or bad they might have, and there's even maybe some questions of are they really, same thing. Like sometimes I wonder about RFK Jr. I'm like, is he really though this like outsider, or is he a
Yeah.
plant to where they make him look like an outsider so that they could then shepherd the people that don't want to follow the political elites anymore,
I've got thoughts on that.
still shepherd.
Yeah.
Well, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, I think it's I think first of all, we should never assume we know that they're aware of that. Like, there's a dynamic in there where people are used as these manipulators and aren't even aware they're being used. And even in that, it could be like a willful ignorance to it. Like, I just don't want to
Yeah.
look over there because I know what I might define. But either way, my point in saying that is because you just don't know for sure. But that I do think that a lot of these elements, pretty much everybody you just listed off, I do not believe are doing, at the very least, are doing an honest, like, if you're, my opinion is, if you're operating through the two-party paradigm, that whether you know it or not, you're not going to be honest about certain things. That's just how I
Hmm.
keep seeing this work. And so the Elons, the Tuckers, and all of this, I just don't believe that they are genuinely fighting for what we are fighting for. I don't. And I like especially at the level of an Elon Musk. I just don't see it. I see
Hmm.
every single problem we've talked about all day today in exactly what he's doing. It's like the dynamic of, we're taught, like, the very people supporting him are pointing out that artificial intelligence is a problem and all these things, brain chips in your body. Oh, it's all bad, except
Yeah.
Elon presents it in a different dynamic. And oh my God, Elon's saving the planet with his good AI and his brain chips.
Yeah.
If you do a checklist for World Economic Forum, he has checked every box. He just called for a carbon tax, for crying out loud, and they got zero pushback from these people who 30 seconds ago said that was going to end the world from the
Right.
World Economic Forum. Like, it doesn't make any sense. I think that it's about cultivating certain understanding, social engineering. I think Twitter in and of itself is right now about, like, again, because they gave me my account back. That's a positive thing. But I think it's about shifting into a more surreptitious sort of social engineering and reimagining what journalism is with Twitter files, which we never got the source material. It was all screenshots. Like, there's
Right.
a very alarming thing there. Same with Tucker, by the way, in my opinion, but doesn't mean there's not good stuff that comes out of there. I thought the
Right.
interview
Right.
had some important things to be said, but in and of itself, I thought there was a kind of a manipulative tool the way it was done. But I'm skeptical. I know it. I'm jaded, but I think we should be very skeptical of anybody in that level.
Sure. Yeah. Well, when it comes to RFK Jr. And people, especially in politics, I think that there are, I don't know, of course, I'm just speculating when it comes to him, but I do think that there very well could be where they know what they're doing. They know they're shepherding people, and it's
Hmm.
because they hate Trump. It's like that
Yeah.
Trump derangement syndrome that I felt this about Andrew Yang. He started this Forward Party, and even asked me to kind of be a part of the Forward Party, and I kind of got in there for a second, and I was kind of going to the meetings, and then I realized, no, this just seems like it's shepherding people away from Trump. It's like anything to
Mhm.
stop Trump. It's just
Right.
under this new like guise of, well, we're bipartisan, we're for left and right, rather than just the rabid left who's anti Donald Trump, or the never Trumpers, Republicans. It's like, oh, you're the independent people, but we still don't want Donald Trump to win,
Hmm.
at anything at all costs. And I think that there could be an element of that, like with RFK Jr., for example, who knows that he's going to pick people off from the right, especially with many of the platform positions he's taken on the border and on Israel. These are very right wing positions that are going to really resonate with people who would otherwise vote for Donald Trump.
Hmm.
And so perhaps, I don't know, but maybe, and I could be wrong, and he could end up joining Trump's ticket. And that's kind of one thing I've wondered. But if he's not going to join his ticket, it could be just a siphoning tool to get, because here's a guy that says through and through, I'm a blue blood, lifelong Democrat. It's like a religion to him,
Hmm.
and then goes independent in order to maybe siphon off the Republican votes to make sure that Donald Trump doesn't make it back in. I mean, there's a possibility there, and it's possible that it's in full knowing, right?
Hmm.
But I do, and I do think that there's a lot of full knowing of, like, the World Economic Forum. I'm sure you followed the recent, the whatever they had, their forum, their most recent Davos get together, right?
Hmm.
And a lot of what they were saying there, it's like they took the pushback and they tried to repackage it and reframe it.
Hmm.
And they're like, okay, we're not going to do central bank CBDC. Like, like we've got this new, the way that they frame it now is to
Right.
appeal to the people who are skeptical and pushing back.
Right.
right?
It's
In
a
a
manipulation,
new and
right?
creative way.
Yeah. Well, you're like you're saying, you're reframing it. It's not CBDC, it's CBDD, whatever. It's like fairly
Right.
different, but it's totally not the same thing. But the whole point was there. This was about rebuilding trust, but that was what they said like 3 years
Right.
ago too. It shows again, like your earlier point, that they've lost an element of influence that they thought they might have had. But yeah, I mean, I just don't. I think that these people are at the very least have blind spots for things that I think a lot of people even within the paradigm are worried about, whether
Yeah.
it's the X or the, overlap with the Great Reset or the technocratic side of it, or, I think even with like a Tucker from the two-party paradigm aspect of it, I think that if you are tapping in, I mean, he's Tucker on X, supporting, saving free speech, 10 people got censored today, it's not real in my opinion. But, to even going back to RFK Jr., I think that you can engage with these people and look at the positives that they may bring to the table while recognizing that, like I said, I think his stance on Israel is morally indefensible. And I don't know how you
Right.
can kind of rectify those two things, so
Right.
it's hard for me to take any of these people seriously, and I think that average people are thirsty for something that is not part of the system. Like, for example, if RFK Jr. had come out and just run independent right out of the gate because we could all tell the system is broken, I argue he would have gotten a waterfall of support. And I
Yeah.
think they just don't want to admit that that's where people are. Most people don't want to take
Yeah.
part in this game anymore, I think.
Yeah, and instead, came out Democrat, but then switched because I think again, that could be strategic, knowing that,
Yeah,
well,
maybe.
people like defectors,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know?
good point.
They think, "Oh, that's so brave of you," you finally left, but yeah, I mean, he's been disappointing for sure for me. I mean,
Mhm.
somebody that I really thought, "Okay, here might be somebody that breaks the duopoly
Yeah,
and wants to dismantle some of these like some of these three-letter agencies, the alphabet agencies, and but then on Israel, man, I just be neutral if in the minimum, like just say America first. I don't want to spend money on wars, like at the minimum,
yeah,
But instead to be so staunchly pro-Israel to the point where he's calling the Palestinian people the most pampered group of people. I mean, really,
yeah.
the most pampered group of people as they're being blown up.
Even
I
worse,
mean,
he said before it had gotten as bad as it is now, obviously, but that his support for Israel would be, quote, unconditional. Like, imagine that now that sentence is hanging over his head right now. Like, that's why he's not, because I mean, how can you possibly pretend that there's no conditions when the world court has said that the allegation of genocide has merit? Like, it's just
yeah,
embarrassing how they're dancing around this right now. And even the largest supporters, the US, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, they're all screaming for a ceasefire now. And even Biden is inching away from, hey, it's over the top. Stop killing children. They've
right.
lost control of this completely. And even still, people are blindly sporting it. It just, I don't know how anybody, like, at this point, at the very least, if he would have come out and simply go, okay, look, I support Israel from a political standpoint, but I can't support what they're doing there, he'd probably win back
Right.
a hell of a lot of that support. But he's
Sure.
quiet.
Yeah. I know. And then the videos that Israel puts out of the spokesperson, on the blue background and the two Israeli flags, and he's got shadows around him. And I mean, he just
Mm,
looks like the most dystopian. Like, I'm like, can you not see the Nazi parallel here? Like, I don't
it's
know. Like, can
crazy.
you not
Yeah.
see? Like, if you just change the background color and the flags, like that's what you look like, buddy. I mean, this it just doesn't look good. It looks genocidal and
Yeah.
insane. But yeah, it's just really, really everything. Well, Ryan, we run out of time. You are so. This is why you do 4-hour shows. You got so much information, so much knowledge. I do encourage people to check out your show, the daily wrap ups, and you do that. I would imagine is that Monday through Friday?
No, I aim for 5 shows a week, but
Awesome.
it can vary based on the days,
Okay.
depending on when I have free time, life and family and all that.
Okay. So you don't have a set time on that. It's just
No,
kind of
no.
whenever you post it,
I know
and
a
then
lot of
people
people
can.
want that from me, but it's one of the last things I have that makes me feel like I have freedom and choice during the day to not, you know what I mean? If I peg myself to a time, I'll probably end up not wanting to do this anymore. So I got to make sure I
Yeah, it's
keep my
hard. It is
mental
hard
freedom.
because, right, I'm pegged to a time, and it is difficult to
Yeah.
get it, but at the same time, it's good because then I get it done. It's
Yeah.
like, okay, I have a deadline. I have to have the show done by a certain time. It's got to get
And
out the
people want
door.
that. I would prefer
Yeah,
that. If I was watching, I wanna know when to catch it and so on. So I get it's
right.
kind of a detriment, but it really it just and it's also for me too that I find that doing this as often as I do, that the stories develop throughout the day. And if I'm
Right.
set on a time, I'm
Yeah,
like live when I'm like, oh, it's happening right now. And I wanna be able to follow it through to the later of the day,
sure. Yeah, I struggle with that myself too.
Yeah.
The wanting to like, wait, I'm still researching this.
Right, right.
Ready. So, Ryan, thank you so much for being here. Again, the founder and editor in chief of The Last American Vagabond and co-founder of Pirate Stream Media. Where can people find Pirate Stream Media?
It's a new building concept. It's something that the website is there. That's just right now it says under construction. But right now it's all facilitated or funneling through T Lab channels, so you'll find it on all
Okay.
of our T Lab channels. But it's
Okay.
just a new platform that kind of grew off of the pirate stream or pirate streaming that I discussed, and it's just about trying to bring in more independent media field and like an umbrella concept. But look into it. It'll be cool as we grow.
It's pretty I mean, the concept of taking over and,
Hmm.
other people's, social handles and whatever, it is cool. It's a cool
Thank
idea.
you.
So, just as long as they don't get banned,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Ryan, thank you so much for being here. I do have the link down below to The Last American Vagabond for people that wanna check you out and watch one of your many long but very informative, as everybody got a taste of today here on the show, of the deep dives that you go into, and really appreciate all the work that you do. You amaze me, honestly. I don't know how you
Thank
do
you.
it. I really don't. I wanted to, like, fly out there and just follow you around for a day and find
Come on
out,
out.
like, how do you organize all this information? Like, where do you put it? Where are all the files? Like, how do you I mean, it's just amazing to me. But thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
being here and great work.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Kim. It was a pleasure.